Hey everyone, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. I've been traveling a little bit around the country, so I'm really happy that I'm back and can record this video for you. If you just want to hear me covering the topic of today's video, use the navigation chapters, but I'm going to start as usual with the map update to catch up what's the situation on the front lines. We're going to start in the north, around Dvorishna area, Kupiansk area. This is this whole thing. And the reports are interesting because I hear people stating that Russia is amassing some troops to go towards Kupiansk. Russia is advancing some villages around Dvorichna, which is located a little bit here to the top. However, there is little to no confirmation of that. So there is like almost no videos and whatnot. The only kind of changes to the map that were reported were essentially Russians just coming into the gray area, the neutral zone, which was only separate. So no Ukrainian positions were essentially pushed out. So it's interesting that on one side we're getting those reports that there is some kind of a movement and like there's preparation and Russians apparently are pushing. Yet I hear and see almost no reports from people on the ground or any kind of videos or reports. So just for you to know that there are rumors around it. So if you know more, please write it in the comments. But otherwise, I have not personally seen any confirmation that there has been a major advance towards Dvorichna and Kupiansk. Some fighting, yes, but that's kind of true for most of the front lines. Now, Russians continue advancing here towards Yampalivka. The situation, if we compare to the situation before, where Russians are still trying to push towards Lima, they want to go to Torsky, Yampolivska, Terny, and also Makiyivka here at the north. Overall, the situation is very tough for Russians. The same part, as I said before, was that we saw a couple of months ago. Ukrainians try to advance towards Kreminna, towards the east. Now Russians try to go the same directions towards the west. But they're struggling exactly on the same positions. The videos that we see are Russians trying to attack, and those are Russian forces that are kind of fresh. We see that they're running like clean and tight, uniforms, that they have new equipment. We've seen the Terminator being destroyed on this direction, but they're definitely struggling, especially if you see the fighting videos. The same one with Terminator is a greatest example of that. It's not the only one, but it's a great example where it just drives to the forest area and then it starts shooting, and it starts shooting basically without finding any targets, just around the forest. So the Russians are having troubles. They're having troubles finding out Ukrainian positions and then kicking them out of them. It's a very tough fight for Russians. So Ukrainians are holding, and these positions are not that easy to take for Russians. And but we're definitely seeing that it's the fresh forces that are being dedicated to this. Bilohorivka, I'm going to repeat this every time. If you hear people saying Bilohorivka has been captured, this is what Russians are doing. They're still doing it every second day. It's the same thing. Bilohorivka is fine. Don't worry about it. Let's talk Bakhmut, because Bakhmut is now 50-50. Obviously, as I said, I don't make any predictions because Bakhmut situation is kind of hard. But what we have seen is that Russians have been able to advance and effectively take control of the Yellow Road, which is the highway here, and they are pushing into the last settlement on Paraskoviivka, which is the last holdout point. And you see the deep state map already updated that this village is a little bit separated. This is due to some pictures appearing from the northeastern part of the village around here, and with the Wagnerites. So it is assumed if they have time to take pictures, then it most probably is already kind of a little bit behind the enemy lines. Not a lot, especially because it's Wagner, because they're usually the first one to come in. But overall, this does suggest that at least enemies are already within the city line. However, the recent news that I'm hearing is that some stabilization was achieved, but we already see that Russians are overtaking. So this position still holds, but it's a very, very, very nominal hold, because the road, as we can see, is already more or less controlled by the Russians. This is a problem, but it's not a critical situation yet, and mostly because we see Ukrainians counterattacking on the south. If you haven't seen reporting from Ukraine recently, in one of his latest videos, he covered about the situation. I'm going to cover this a little bit back. You see this a little bit of a salient here. So, and he explains really well the tactical positions here, how Ukrainians were able to essentially attack from both sides and cut that salient. And more importantly, I can give you a little bit more context on this. Remember, we saw some of the videos around some of the fresh Ukrainian troops being prepared and people are standing near the APCs. Well, the same troops suddenly appeared in this direction. So what I can tell you is that those reinforcements that we saw, just them gathering up, have now made it to Ivanivske and the south of Bakhmut. So Ukrainians here, and the reports that I'm hearing is that Ukrainians are pushing back the Russians and pushing a little bit them further and further from Ivanivske. So for now, the situation in Bakhmut is 50-50. There is Russian success at the north, but to essentially to close the Bakhmut approach, they would need to also do the same from south. And in south, Ukraine is counterattacking. So a lot of the achievements from the north are just getting mitigated by the Ukrainian counteroffensive on the south. So far, Bakhmut still holds. And some people said, yes, but this is also there is plenty of roads. Yes, there are plenty of roads. People are misunderstanding some of the reports when Ukrainian militaries are saying it's dangerous to move along those roads because they're under mortar shelling. So that's true, yes, but then again, in war, there is often many things that are dangerous, but it's done anyway. That's why, for example, Bakhmut is closed for civilians and reporters or anything else, but the army personnel still is able to go into the city despite the roads being under shelling, but it's not the direct shelling yet. Overall, the situation in Bakhmut, 50-50. Now, we also have additional direction that's been outlined that Russians are now putting effort in. And this is direction of Avdiivka. Well, the one that is from Opytne here, it's been going on for a while, but we know that there is now new forces that's been committed to this. And more importantly, here around Nevelske, the map haven't moved here a lot, but the reports are that battles are extremely intense. Nevelske is kind of important. It's a big kind of district because it would open a little bit a little bit more breathing room for the Russians, because right now that fortress around Nevelske is neglecting a lot of the Russian advance in the region. With regards to Vuhledar, the situation didn't improve for Russians. Right now, they are regrouping. They are thinking about what to do, and I'm going to talk about the situation that they're having around Vuhledar and so on in a second part. But overall, that's the situation. Right now, Russia is still conducting their offensive operation, which goes very unimpressively, to say the least. People misunderstand a little bit why am I so sure that the counteroffensive is going on, because they don't see, like big columns or like huge swaths of land of Ukraine being taken. So they just look at the map. They look at the map yesterday, a month ago, and so on. It's like nothing changed. So why are you saying that there is any kind of offensive? Well, the offensive is defined in this case by the increased flow of reserves. So Russians have started dedicating their reserves. They started sending in fresh vehicles. They started sending in fresh troops. They started sending in fresh reinforcements. And it's happening in multiple directions at once. This is essentially the attack phase of Russians. We already initially expected that this assault is not going to be the same as we saw on the 24th of February last year, just because Russians don't have the element of surprise. And to be honest, they don't have a lot of other things as well. But I'm going to talk about it in the second part of the video. Before I continue, please hit like, subscribe, and share this video on your social media. It really helps get more people to view it, and so we get good coverage of the situation of war out there. Two topics before I start talking about the main subject. First one, people have asked me, why am I so unfrustrated with the countries that besides Germany that are now not providing tanks and so on? So apparently now that it's Germany delivering tanks and Scholz is publicly advocating to deliver tanks to Ukraine, I should be frustrated with everyone else besides Germany. It's obviously people that really like Scholz. They are feeling very sensitive to me giving him shit at the time. And now they want to get some redemption from me, or at least just want to bite me for some reason. The point what I want to make, I am frustrated with everyone. There is no one that I'm not frustrated with. Maybe Poland and Baltic countries technically. But whatever help Ukraine has gotten so far and is getting right now, it should have gotten earlier. For me, Ukraine needs to be supplied with whatever it needs right now. There shouldn't be any taboos. There shouldn't be any restrictions of like, whoa, you shouldn't fire at the Russian areas. You shouldn't fire in Russia proper. Bullshit. Give Ukraine weapons, supply it with everything. I'm frustrated with everyone. It's just the gradation of frustration can differ depending on how much BS is being poured into my ears. If there is like so much that I cannot take it anymore, that's when I'm going to start trash talking some certain people at that particular moment. Nothing personal. It's just purely major frustration with the West not getting their shit together and supporting Ukraine as they should have been. Next, the question with apparently Russia is amassing some, at least rumors has it. I haven't heard confirmation from proper analysts yet. There was mostly New York Times or the Economist, I forgot which one it was, article that Russia is amassing major air assets alongside the border with Ukraine. And if it's true, then I want you to know that it's a very dumb idea. Ukraine is right now extremely saturated with anti-air systems. If Russian aircraft, for some weird reason, would decide to fly into Ukraine-controlled space, they will be shut down quite fast. The problem Russia has been having, that only 8% of their combat aviation was shut down, was not the problem with the aircrafts. They had plenty of aircrafts. What they didn't have is a lot of combat-ready pilots. A lot of the pilots that Russia technically had a combat-ready pilots were actually not. Russian military not always were dedicating enough training for a lot of pilots to fly the aircraft essentially, and a lot of them are pilots as nominally, because just finishing this the piloting academy, the flying academy, does not make you a combat mission capable pilot. That needs to be a certain amount of hours and needs to be a certain amount of training and exercises done. Maybe some of them has been done recently, but not to a scale that is presented. In any way, the air over Ukraine is extremely contested, not because Russia didn't have the aircraft. They did have the aircraft. The problem was the anti-air, ground-based anti-air assets that Ukraine has. And let me give you a hint. The number of anti-air assets that Ukraine has been having has not been reduced. On the contrary, it's been increased with a lot of Western-style anti-air systems. So I wouldn't worry about that at all. And then let's go to the main point. Russia is having a really bad time with their offensive. To put it in a metaphor, Russia was this fighter that was just like, had a very rough start in round one, so it's like the round two was kind of coming up. So he was like, okay, I am ready now. I am so strong, like I've been training for this, like he slapped himself on the chest just to get like some blood flowing, or at least to feel good. And then there's like, okay, round two. And then it starts like, round starts is like the punch is hit. So the Battle of Vuhledar is like, okay, punch here. It's like, okay, Bakhmut, okay, we start slowly, okay, it didn't hit, but like, it's like something's grazed the enemy. And then he puts the second punch, it's like Battle of Vuhledar, and it's completely gone. And then suddenly like he gets 2 hits in his face. And now he's like, whoa, what is happening? And he like feels stunned. That's exactly the position where Russian assault is right now. So Russians, they thought that they will, like start the assault. They pour in more new fresh troops. They pour into Kremina direction. They pour into Bakhmut direction. They're going to pour them in the Vuhledar direction. And they're going to start squeezing Ukraine from like all those major sides. Is like, aha, and we're going to rough into the Ukrainian defense. And what instead they got is a punch to the face. So around Bakhmut, I've already told you that the situation is not looking super positive. They're getting in front, but it's like playing a lot of blood only because they are at a very, very pretty much combat, like a close quarter combat range. So they can actually dominate on top of what was built by waves and waves and waves and thousands and tens of thousands of prisoners sacrificed to cross that line where the artillery is already less effective because it's a city line and they're literally fighting hand-to-hand combat now. And just because there's a lot of Russians, they're able to advance. Whereas if we look for the south now, Ukraine has gotten reinforcements and they're pushing back the Russians south of Bakhmut. And Vuhledar was a complete devastation, a one-sided defeat. And this staggered the Russians. So now they are there with, stars flying around their head. And they're thinking, was that a good idea? Right? Do we have the strength? So as many of Russians always do first, and then try to do it again, get the second hit, and then it's like, okay, maybe it wasn't that smart. But I'm pretty sure that the politics are still there, so they're still going to be advancing in front, and they're still going to be throwing man at the Ukrainian positions. But the more important problem is that Russia, as I explained when I said why the Russian offensive will fail, you can check out that video, is that Russia was expecting this to be the same repetition of May, June last year, where they had a dominant advantage. Because Russia started this war where they thought that they made the main mistakes with just pushing deep into Ukrainian territory and exposing their logistics and trying to fight really, really smartly, like, the Western powers, trying to do precise strikes, trying to do this, okay, let's not harm the civilians. Once they failed with that completely, there's like, okay, let's do what we always do. Let's do the burn everything to the ground and then advance and just capture the city that doesn't exist anymore. That's just, ruins. And that's how they fought. The problem is that they cannot fight. So again, we hear more and more reports that on many directions, the main attack directions, Russian artillery still has some advantage. But on many other directions, like minor attack directions, Russian artillery is almost, if not completely equal to Ukrainian, essentially 1-to-1. We already know that how Ukrainian artillery works, about 1-to-3 in favor of Russians, is a parity in between Russian and Ukrainian artillery. So 1-to-1 is pretty much a domination by Ukrainian artillery. And this is bad because that's how Russian army fights. Russian army is made to fight an artillery war. And if they cannot fight that kind of war, then they cannot fight, period. And we are getting extremely close to the breaking point. You might ask, well, how did we get there? It's like, what was it, HIMARS? Yes, HIMARS, but also some other points. Firstly, the artillery shortage in general. Russians have been pulling a lot of artillery, and that artillery, it's also old. It also had a shelf life. And that artillery, the problem I already explained some time ago, Russia has plenty, for example, of barrels for that artillery. They have huge stocks of those barrels. The problem is, how do you replace them? Russia is not the Soviet Union. They don't have enough factory productions so they can replace those barrels for those artillery pieces. Russia is also struggling with a lot of their artillery shells. A lot of the artillery shells that they're pulling out from their long-term storage facilities, they were first kind of okay. Next grade, they were kind of more or less okay. And then they got into the old stuff. And the old stuff is problematic. A lot of old stuff is duds. Like the powders inside of artillery, shell, technically, like they can still fire. The problem is, like, if it's not treated properly or the condition were not the best, it can just misfire or not fire at all. And that became a huge problem because, like, if there is a bunch of artillery pieces and a lot of them are duds, then artillery is essentially not firing. Then a lot of what logistics are bringing to the front lines is not actually firing. So imagine artillery fires one shell and then the next 2, 3 are duds. What do they do then? Next, the issue with logistics. So HIMARS here is very important. They destroyed those big munition stockpiles of fresh artillery shells, the good ones that they had, and now their artillery system is also being struggled. So right now, Russians have readjusted their artillery, so they're able to hide some of their ammunition under, like, for example, schools, kindergartens, and whatnot. But it's also problematic for their logistics to cope with that. They cannot supply enough artillery shells to the front lines so they can fight how they know how to fight. Moreover, Ukrainians have been reinforced with 155 artillery munitions. Now Ukraine is reporting that they're having over 40% of their artillery is Western style artillery, and West is increasing the production for their ammunition. Right now there's a little bit of a lull. That's why Ukraine is still not dominating an artillery war, because they're just running out of the shells. However, together with the introduction with the new counter-battery fire radars that were just coming and coming and coming and coming, Russian artillery has the problem. Imagine, Russian artillery comes to positions, fires one shell, next two are duds, and then on the fourth one, you try to fire it, and then you get hit by a counter-battery fire. That is a big problem for the Russians. They have been struggling with a lot of those, so they try to supplement this. They are rolling right now D10 artillery pieces. They are over 80 years old artillery pieces. Their effective range of that artillery is 13 kilometers, and it's 152 millimeters, so it's like equivalent to 155 artillery standard in NATO. To the comparison, the 777 artillery piece that Ukraine is getting, M777, fires at 30 kilometers. So 30, 80-year-old one compared to new one that Ukraine gets, well, comparatively new, that is 30 kilometer. Moreover, the one that is also precise, because Ukraine is also getting precise munition, whereas the D10 was useful when it was the Soviet times, and they would just put like 100 of them in line, and they would like fire 100 of them for like an hour, because the Soviets couldn't allow it, because that's what the Soviet production was, a lot of dumb shit, but like even the idiot can fire it. So what am I saying basically is that the way that the Russian army was fighting, it cannot fight anymore, and they're having major problem with the core of their campaign. Whatever they have been gaining so far has been bought through just human waves advancement, but that was still supported by some artillery. If Ukraine will continue in the same pattern and Russia will lose the artillery war, this will be a critical breaking point for the whole campaign. At that moment, even like we were talking that Russia already lost on a strategic level, but now we're talking the level of battle. Russia will be kicked out physically. Every single Russian will be either moved beyond the border of Ukraine with artillery pieces, or they get buried. And I'm very much looking forward to that coming quite soon. Thank you so much for watching this video. Big thanks to all of the supporters of this channel. Join if you want to support me, or if you want to support Ukraine, check out the first link comment. I have the links how you can support Ukraine directly. I love you guys. Slava Ukraini, and I'll see you next time.